Now we've been, with our filtering, able to filter our data quite extensively in tables, either by using the data slicer or by using the filtering drop-down options, where we were presented with a variety of filtering parameters, dependent on the data type, greater than, less than, all those kind of things. And with the date ones, it got quite clever with particular date ranges. But none of that cleverness, whether with the data slicer or the filter drop-down, can handle an OR. They're always AND. So as soon as you start to filter by two sets of criteria, then those criteria must be AND. So for example, we could filter by people who had high school education and were skilled manual, and you would get everybody who matched up. But what we couldn't do is an OR query. We couldn't say, okay, let's see everyone who has either made it to graduate degree or is currently employed in clerical. Not AND, but OR. One or other can be true. Both can be true, obviously, so they could be an AND, but it's OR. If one is true or the other is true, then pull them into my result. That cannot be done with the little drop-down arrows. We need to start looking at advanced filtering. Now, Excel has a great tool for advanced filtering, but we just need to do a little bit of setup first. The easiest thing to do is to add a new sheet, which I'm going to call criteria. And then in this criteria sheet, we're going to mimic the headings. So the headings have to be exactly the same as our data table in this case. So we copy those, we go into our criteria sheet, and then we paste. And then we have the same heading columns across the top. Let's just auto fit those so I can read them. Thinking about the OR statement that we were trying to carry out, which was that people had reached a certain educational level of graduate degree. So the criteria would be graduate degree. I don't need to auto-fit, but I'm going to just to make it easier to read. And the occupation is clerical. Now I could put clerical in here, and when we do the advanced filtering, you'll see that that will then get treated as an AND. If I put the clerical in the next row down, then it gets treated as an OR. These are effectively my criteria. Education equals graduate degree, or occupation equals clerical, and the OR is only determined because of the separate row. Now we get to do the clever bit. So we go back to our data, anywhere in the table. We then go up to the data ribbon and come to advanced on the filtering option. One click brings up the advanced filter dialog box. So we're looking to filter the list in place, or we can copy it to another location, but we just want to take our current data and filter it by the set criteria. And the list range has been chosen because we're in the table, and that's the whole table, so that's fine. The tricky bit is then telling Excel where the criteria is. Well, it's not that tricky. We simply browse. We click the browse button, go to our criteria sheet, and we make sure that we highlight all the columns and the three rows. So the row that contains the headings, the row that contains the first of our criteria, and the row that contains our OR criteria. So we need to go right to the beginning. I'll show you shortly how we can make this a little bit faster. And then we can click to go back. So our list range is in here, the criteria is stored in here. We then say OK, and the filtering takes place, and it finds 20 records. Those 20 records, if I look at the two columns concerned, should be, and in fact are, either graduate degree in their education, let's widen that up, so that's those three, or clerical in employment. So if they don't happen to be of graduate degree, then they will be clerical. There we find, in fact, that is the case. You can do anything in this criteria field. If we go back into here, let's say we don't want to do these two options, graduate degree and clerical. Let's remove those. Perhaps what we would like to do is everybody whose name begins with A. So let's go to the first name, A asterisk. So that's the wildcard character. We can use those in here as well, just as we saw in the normal filtering. The first name is going to begin with A, and then because we want to make use of an OR, we come down to the second line, or their total purchase YTD is a greater than, so we can use the more than symbol, 6,000. So we have two criteria in place again, one on each separate line. Go back to the contacts, back to advanced, filter in place. It spots the list range quite happily. We need to then click into the criteria range and again browse to pick that up. I'm still yet to show you the quick way of doing this, but we'll get there. Highlight all three rows because criteria is in both of those rows, and the headings are in the top row all the way to the end so that you can match the columns to the criteria, and then OK. A little bit of working, and we should find that we only have people whose name begins with A, so we should have everybody whose name begins with A and everybody whose total purchase YTD is greater than 6,000. You see that this is taking a little longer than a normal filtering because it's having to visit each row to decide if it meets either one criteria or the other. And in fact, just over half of our records match one or the other. So these two begin with A, then John doesn't, so his year to date must be greater than 6,000. Total purchase YTD, 8,000. All of these down here are over 6. They match the criteria. Someone there isn't, begins with 2. Their name must begin with A, and it does, in fact, Amanda. Obviously, some people's name will begin with A and have sold more than 6,000, so they'll meet the criteria on both accounts, but they still are in the set. Now, I did say I was going to show you how you could speed up the criteria side of things. Well, we can do that with a named range. I come into the criteria and highlight the top 3 rows and then give them a name. Again, no imagination. We'll call the range criteria. Let's make a change to that criteria and say the age is greater than 40. We need to remove the criteria that's already there. More than 6,000 needs to go. And their name, well, let's remove the first name and say their last name begins with S. Again, because they're on separate lines, this is an OR. Last name begins with S, or they're over 40. Into the contacts, advanced filtering. This range picks that up fine. It's actually remembered my previous criteria, so I need to delete that. What I want to put in here instead is just equals criteria, because that's my named range. Obviously, there's no little helps here either, though. When you're doing it in the form, you get a little help. I've got to make sure I spell that named range correctly. So assuming I have, OK, and that filter then gets applied, and in fact finds nobody that matches those requirements. Probably been a little too strict. Let's go back. Let's remove the age. It might be the surname. We might not even be beginning with S. Come back in. Advanced filter. This should now pull through everybody, because we've left the S asterisk in, but we removed the age. So it begins with S asterisk or anything, which means that everybody will be in here. But because the advanced filtering is in place, it's having to visit each record. This is not the fastest way to work with filters. If you want ANDs, then go with the slicers or the filter drop-downs and retain this advanced filtering for the use of essential ORs. Everybody is included because they meet one or other of the criteria, so they either have a surname beginning with S or anything. Let's go back to the criteria. We know A asterisk in the first name has some people, so let's do that as our first criteria, and then we can make the age back to what it was, which is greater than 40. That way, when we go back to our contacts and run the advanced filter, OK, we know this time we will find somebody. In fact, we get 79 records match one or other of the criteria, beginning with A or greater than 40.